I'm going to put some things back together here to get them out of the way. The wiper deck can go back together, and then those parts won't be on the roof of the car anymore, and I'll know those parts are back on the car. To do that, we have this 6-pin connector with the circle boot. Needs to go back into the circular hole of the wiper deck and attached to the motor. Plugs in next to the motor. When you plug this in, make sure that you don't plug it in with the wire going through the wiper blade arms, because eventually it'll be cut. Now with that plugged in, we can lay it back down, and then once we have it laying down, we push the arm back out. If we push the arm out, the arm of the motor assembly, then we can attach the blades at resting position, and that'll be the right place for them to start. Before you try to line up bolt holes, make sure you get the metal tongue back in the rubber boot so that all sides of the motor are supported properly. Once you know it's laying in there nice, you can just grab from the outside, push the motor arms to the passenger side. Before we put any of the plastic shields or the decking back, let's make sure we get the 3 primary bolts back in place. Okay, we have that bolted down. So now let's get this motor shield back on here. The motor shield lays and creates a seal with the windshield. You're going to want to make sure that's back in the right place, so when the deck is on top, you get a good seal. You don't really get any water running onto the motor directly. We kept the passenger side deck on, so now we need to reinstall driver's side deck. It's all one piece, and the soft rubber here goes into the corner to make a seal at the corner of the windshield. So come in, it past the hood of the car. And make sure the rubber is going down in all the way down and meets the edge of the quarter panel. So then when you pull it back to meet the edge of the deck, to line up the wiper arm hole, you will be pulling the rubber back toward the front of the car. You'll get the best seal you can that way. Make sure all your holes line up. Okay, we can take our plastic rivets and get them back in here. If you have the original rivets, they go in, there's a specific way they go in, they have a contour shape. So make sure you note that contour shape when you stick it in there. It doesn't really matter what direction, but you want it to be noted so you can easily get the inner rivet in there. Okay, we got all the plastic rivets back in there. Let's replace the outside deck liner. You start from a side and push it back into the groove. You should see, because it was previously installed, you'll see the contours are matching the bends. As you reinstall, you want to make sure that now the rubber is now on top of the deck, plastic deck. This way, when water is being collected, it will go to the center of the deck and it will go through the drains. Windshield washer delivery line lays across like this. Windshield washing fluid delivery comes from the canister over here. You also want to make sure the windshield washer delivery fluid line is just under the rubber here. If you do that, that will make sure it's going to clear when the hood closes. If the rubber is crowded this way and a line is on top, you may see it get smashed. There's an open hook every so often in the deck to place windshield washer delivery line in. Let's get it back in there. Now we put these wiper blades on. On this 7th generation Impala, on this GMW body car, 2000-2005, this arm is the passenger arm. we push the arm for the wiper blade all the way to the passenger side. So we have a reasonable assurance that we could put the wiper blade in the closest position to rest that lines up in the splines, and it's not going to want to return further down. There's the soft line coming off the wiper blade arm. Let's reattach it to windshield washer delivery line. See, the arm of the drivers is straighter. It's also bigger. There is a rest position for the wiper blades in the deck. On this generation of cars, Monte Carlos and Impalas, the wiper blades duck down a little behind the hood. Now let's not forget the nut and the plastic cap for the wiper blade arms. Once you start to feel yourself pulling the wiper arm with the wrench, that's probably tight enough. The plastic cap pushes on, and that's it. Before we start putting brake components back on, let's reattach the AC cooling lines and the engine coolant that goes to the heater core. Okay, now we need to reconnect these coolant lines. I've marked which one was on the top, but if you're coming into this or did not mark which is which, then make it straightforward, because it only goes on one way, in that the bottom line is smaller. The hose is smaller, the connector is smaller. So let's reattach these lines, make sure the clamps are in place. Before I get ready to stick these lines on, I'm going to get the clamp closer to the end where it needs to be, so there's less movement required once it's installed, once it's deeper in the engine. I'm going to stick the bottom one on first, because the other one's going to be in the way once I have this one installed. So now let's put the brake booster drum back in. The arm goes through the center boot, and it has these wings. They match to the 4 cardinal lips. So it screws in there and stays in tight. This edge, you need to push this edge into place once you're screwed in, or as you screw in, and then it'll stay locked. So I feel I'm locked in on all sides. Now I just need to turn the rest of the way and I'll be locked in. I need to go a little bit further. There's a lip. You're going to want to make sure it's actually in there. Let me take a picture of what I'm doing in case it helps you. They make a tool to attach to these bolts, but I don't have that. So I started out with just this wrench extended, and then once I had turned some, then I needed something else to get wedged in there. That allowed me to turn this clockwise to get it in. The tab is now in there. So now it won't come out. It's raised up and now it's in the groove. There's a groove in this fork. If you were taking this out, you need to push that to the rear of the car to get it to come free before you go counterclockwise to let it out. Before I go and get the master cylinder back on the brake booster, let's make sure the brake booster arm came through correctly and reattach it to the brake pedal. That's what's happening under here. Brake booster arm is coming through, and then it needs to go on the brake pedal pin right there. If the arm of the brake booster turned while you were installing it, that's okay. It can be turned on its own to match up to the pin. This is the clip that holds the arm on. The way it works is the far side is bigger, then you push it on, and then the pin on the other side will hold it on. There's a ring in the pin that this should slide onto, and you'll feel it clicking, and then it'll stay. This is what it looks like with the clip on there. You need to make sure it's all the way on there and it stays there so you don't lose your brake pedal. Alright, we confirmed the brake pedal is attached. We got the clip on there. So let's get the master cylinder back on the brake booster. going to be easier, so let's just do it now. Let's reinsert the vacuum line for the brake booster. Now we got master cylinder back on there. See if we lost any fluid. It doesn't look like we lost very much. That's good. So we can bring transmission fluid dipstick filler back near the master cylinder. And then reattach EGR valve shield. EGR valve shield just has one bolt and one nut holding it on here. So now we're doing the throttle cable. Throttle cable should come up like this, and then there's a clip here for it to lay in, and then one here as well. So before we connect that, we'll release these fuel lines and reattach them where they go. All right, now that fuel delivery is restored, we can install the throttle cable. Okay, now we have EGR shield back, throttle bracket, throttle cable in place. Now we'll just route this connector on top of gear selector cable, because it has a pin that goes on this strut support. I'm just going to zip tie cruise control to this support. It doesn't have anywhere to go. And let's not forget brake fluid level sensor. It's part of the main chassis wiring harness. Let's get him back in there. So we got fuel lines, we got throttle, we got those wires ready. One more thing we need to do here. We need to bring power and ignition through that hole in the floor. To make sure we have enough room so we can reroute it where it goes. It comes out of the floor, goes over here, reconnects to this here. We need to rotate the engine into the service position. To do that, put the transaxle transmission in neutral, and then you can pull it forward.
You also need to remember to disconnect the two forward engine struts so it can actually rotate forward.
It only goes so far, but it should give us a lot more room. These are connectors that go through the floor. And this is the boot. I broke one of the bolts off that goes on here. And it's such a pain in the ass, I think I'm just going to put a bolt in from the engine side. So we'll take this bolt, and I'll be able to insert this from engine side, and I can still have this mounted well, but not have the nut on that side. So that means we'll go like this. And I think that'll be an easier install. This is the plug emerging from the hole. I need to route it here and over to this connector. If the wire pulled a little bit further, it's important to want to get it behind this line so then we can come up to the corner. Okay, so we have fusible links for the power on, and we have ignition and power coupler connected. The only other thing to do under the hood here is to put back the coolant reservoir. Before we reconnect the battery, I want to test that the wiring is in a good place. So to do that, I'm going to connect all the components of the dash into the wiring harness. Let's see how it behaves.